The decades working with clients, I have noticed that loneliness and a feeling of being socially isolated is extremely detrimental to human health. Now, with this pan-epidemic, when so many of us are asked to isolate, there is a wellspring of interesting new studies looking at just what happens to the physical body, to the emotional body when we have to isolate from one another. Human beings are basically social animals. We work in groups, we live in groups, and there's a lot of interesting things that happen when we're isolated. I want you to think about these problems that arise when we isolate and maybe be calculating what you can do to counter some of these negative effects of isolation. This is especially important as we move into the holiday season, and I'm certainly personally working on these aspects. So what did the researchers find? They found, one, that there's a loss of muscle. Why? Because simply we aren't so physically active. How many people can't go to the gym? They can't do the same activities. So we must be diligent to get a lot of physical activity to try to maintain muscle mass. Get up from that TV and do a little less Netflix, get outside more, do more physical activity. A loss of muscle. They find that the heart and lungs get weaker. Of course, this again is associated with less physical activity, less interaction. They find that there's a weight gain, and that is pretty substantial in many people. So we have to be really careful for that. And many people are trying to discipline themselves to just eat perhaps 2 or 3 times a day, not to snack, and to stop eating at least 3 hours before bed. That can be really helpful. They find that posture is affected. I know when I sit all day working at the computer, I tend to slump. People in isolation tend to get poor posture. So let's pay attention to that, even if we're around the house, even if we're just doing chores. Pay attention to what it feels to stand up like you had a really lovely bracelet, a necklace you wanted to show off. Posture, try to maintain posture, because we do tend to lose good posture in isolation. Sleep suffers, and they actually find that the brain slows down. Of course, when we're isolated, we don't have so much interaction. We aren't challenging one another in different ways. Find ways to challenge yourself and keep your mind active. Be good, be fun for each of you, some of you, to send in your comments, what you're doing to combat these problems. And lastly, they find that, the nutrient intake may get a little bit lower. So pay attention to the diet. Try to avoid snacking. Try to avoid these comfort foods of processed foods and sugars and all that. Social isolation is damaging to our health. We're social beings. Let's try to be as social we can in whatever way we can, and think about combating these well-documented problems that arise when we're isolated.